Good evening. Now, if I were at another law school in the midst of another group of people, that good evening would suffice. But this is the National Black Pre-Law Conference. We are here at Harvard University, and I'm in the midst of black brilliance. So I want to say good evening, and I want y'all to say it loud enough for the folks down at Yale Law School to hear it. Good evening. Good evening. Now I know I'm in the right place. Thanks, brother. I heard your bass. Tonight I'm reminded that we have assembled ourselves here at Harvard Law School at a particular moment in American history. It is a moment in which a Joshua generation, a hip-hop generation, has lifted up with their hearts and their minds what has become well more than a hashtag Black Lives Matter. This anthem, if you will, of human dignity and human aspiration is stated as such because Black Lives Matter is the moral predicate for all lives matter. Unless the first is true, the second will never be true. And so we've gathered ourselves at Harvard Law School at a moment in our country in the face of rampant voter suppression. Millennials have come to the polls in record numbers, surpassing the youth turnout for the last 25 years. Your generation did that, and you did that on Tuesday. We come to Harvard Law School at a moment when police misconduct has rendered black bodies and brown bodies lifeless, and yet animated and inspired and enlivened a movement across these United States. We come to this law school, we come to this pre-conference, or this pre-law conference, as aspiring attorneys. Why? Because we believe in the power of the law. We believe in the power of our aspirations. We believe in the power of our struggle. We believe in the power of our foremothers, our forefathers, and our forebears. We believe in ourselves. We believe in we. In receiving this bit of recognition, I would be less than candid if I did not share with you that I arrived at this moment and arrived at this honor having come here on the backs of role models. My role models are not distinguished members of elite faculties. My role models have not always been graced with gray hair and long experience. My role models are 16 years old and 17 years old, in middle school and in high school. I'm reminded of some role models I met in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When I got off of a plane as the president and CEO of the NAACP in the middle of the wintertime, Jamar Clark had been laid into an untimely and unjust grave. A group of teenagers, high school students, college students gathered together outside of a police precinct to protest his death, to protest the empirical and experiential reality of African Americans, particularly millennial African Americans, that is such that a young black man is 25 times more likely to lose his life at the hands of the police than his white counterpart. I met these young people outside of a police station in 20-degree weather. We protested, we demonstrated. The next day we came together in another demonstration. Then I got on to an airplane and flew back to Baltimore, Maryland, to the headquarters of the NAACP. I received on my phone a Twitter notice that 2 white nationalists shot 5 of the young people I stood with only days before. History does not tell us that those young people abandoned their tasks. History does not tell us that they ran. History does not tell us that they gave up. They pursued justice for Jamar Clark. I admire them. They are my role models, and so are you. The role models that inspire us and speak to us and call to our conscience may be found everywhere. Our role models are in middle school. Our role models are in high school. Our role models are on college campuses. Our role models are not only lawyers and those on the Supreme Court, but aspiring lawyers. Those who attend a pre-law conference with the commitment, the dedication, and the resolve to become lawyers. That would be you. May I share with you that our role models are not only among the young, but also those who've long since crossed the stage of history. When I was a young man, my grandmother, who believed it was her duty and responsibility to lend out my services to all of her friends, my grandmother was blissfully unaware of the implications of and the applicability of the 13th Amendment, barring involuntary servitude. She lent out my services to anyone that she deemed fit to have my services. So as a high schooler, I found myself in the front yard of one of her friends mowing her lawn. Afterwards, she said to me, "Young man, I want you to come inside and have a cup of tea with me." You know how Southern black women can be of a certain vintage, a kind of old world charm. And so this 80-year-old black woman had me sit down for a cup of tea. She asked me, "Young man, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I think I want to be a lawyer." She said, "Do you think or do you know?" I said, "I know I want to be a lawyer." She said, "Well, where do you plan on going to law school?" I said, "Well, ma'am, I'm not really sure about that." She said, "Well, I'm telling you where you need to go. You need to go to Yale Law School." Well, to be candid with you, hailing from Georgetown, South Carolina, I assumed Yale Law School was someplace north of Washington, D.C., but I wasn't entirely sure. So I said, "Ma'am, why Yale Law School?" She said, "Because my brother went to Yale Law School." And then she went into another room and brought back a black and white photograph of yesteryear, a sepia-toned picture of a time gone by, revealing a group of white men and one lone brother. She said, "This is my brother, Yale Law School class of 1912. His name was Roger Demosthenes O'Kelly. He was deaf and blind in one eye. He was the first black deaf lawyer in these United States. You need to go to Yale Law School." I said, "Yes, ma'am." Many years later, I found myself at Yale Law School, went up into the stacks and found the class roster. Roger, this is a Demosthenes O'Kelly, a role model, speaking to me from the grave. May I suggest to you that Thurgood Marshall is speaking to you, speaking to your aspirations, speaking to your moral ambitions, speaking life over your career as a lawyer. Third role model. As I was walking through the library, I looked up and I saw a picture of a black woman wearing a clerical collar. Now, having graduated from seminary and aspiring to be a minister and a civil rights lawyer, I never met a minister who was also a lawyer. Definitely had never met a black woman who was a minister and a lawyer. And I was fascinated by this picture. And beneath the picture was the name Pauli Murray. Anybody here from North Carolina? 3 people. Y'all already know the story. Pauli Murray was a black woman who graduated #1 in her class at Howard University, an HBCU. Somebody snap. Pauli Murray graduated #1 in her class at Howard University Law School. She made a bet with her professors that we can whip Jim Crow in a matter of years. They laughed at her. They mocked her. She wrote a term paper. She researched the subject and devised and mapped out a strategy for beating Jim Crow. She applied and was entitled to apply to Harvard Law School for a graduate degree. Harvard Law School, in its infinite wisdom, turned her down. Why? Not because she was black, but because she was a woman. Pauli Murray wrote the dean of this law school a letter and said, I would change my sex, but because it's easier for you to change your mind, I suggest you change your mind. Pauli Murray was not admitted to Harvard Law School. Went out to University of California, Berkeley, picked up a graduate degree there, picked up a JSD at Yale Law School, founded the National Organization of Women, became the first black Episcopal priest, was a poet, founded, or rather inspired, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she wrote that famous brief which brought down or helped to defeat gender discrimination. Black women, role models, speaking life over your career. Another role model. When I was a little boy growing up in South Carolina, my grandma, a special woman, she insisted that I get my hair cut at my granddaddy's barbershop. Not because he was stylish, but because he was free. My granddaddy would tell me these stories about his rebellious and radical days. But as a young man, I could not believe that anybody over 25 could be radical. They could be revolutionary, that they could be woke. That was generationally inconceivable for me. So he told me as a little boy that he was an activist in his youth. Many years ago, I found myself as a student at Yale Law School. Students were passing around a book of photographs. In that book of photographs was a picture of a very handsome young man. And beneath his picture were these words, Reverend James Prelo, candidate for Congress, state of South Carolina. My granddaddy, after Thurgood Marshall won Smith versus Allwright in 1944, which barred the all-white Southern Democratic primary, which pushed black people to the periphery of our democracy. In other words, in a state where all the elected office holders were Democrats, if you couldn't participate in the Democratic primary, you couldn't participate in the democratic process. So black people had a vote symbolically, but not in terms of political power. So when Thurgood Marshall won that case Smith versus Allwright in 1944, my granddaddy decided to run for Congress in 1946. He didn't run because Fox News told him he can win. He didn't run because CNN told him he can win. He didn't run because Gallup poll told him he can win. He ran because he wanted to inspire and incite the moral imagination of black folks to vote. My granddaddy was and is a role model. May I suggest to you that you too have role models. Those role models are called mama and daddy, aunt and uncle, grandma and grandpa. Those role models are all around you. Those role models are speaking life over you. Those role models believe in you. Those role models stand beside you. Those role models are standing behind you. Those role models are calling you to be the lawyers that lead this nation. I'm going to close with one last role model. A few years ago, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, Shelby versus Holder, which dismantled and broke the Voting Rights Act, enfeebling Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and unleashing a Machiavellian frenzy of voter disenfranchisement from one end of our republic to the other. And in the wake of that, we at the NAACP decided to march from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C., 1,002 miles over the course of 40 days, 100-degree heat, 110 degrees heat index, pavement at 113 degrees, 43 days. In Selma, I met a man whose chosen name was Middle Passage. Middle told me in Selma that he wanted to march the entire distance from Selma, Alabama to Washington, D.C. Middle Passage, 67 years of age. Middle Passage, a veteran of the Navy. Middle Passage, a veteran of the Vietnam War. Middle Passage told me that he wanted to walk the entire distance because he wanted to inspire a generation of activists, because he wanted to ignite in them an appetite and an energy for social justice. So I looked at this elderly man, 67 years of age, and I had my doubts about whether or not he would make it. 900 miles later, we found ourselves in Spotsylvania, Virginia. Middle Passage had walked nearly the entire distance carrying the American flag. We walked through a rainstorm. And while it rained, Middle wrapped up the flag. But when the rain stopped, when the clouds parted, when the blue sky emerged, when the sun came out, Middle unfurled the flag, but when he did, he collapsed to the pavement. My hardest day at the NAACP was explaining to a group of students about your age that Middle didn't make it. Middle didn't come back from the hospital. Middle died. But the hardest question I was ever asked at the NAACP was asked by those students who asked, if a man was willing to die for the right to vote, why can't we vote and fight for the right to vote? As a role model who wasn't a lawyer, he spoke to the reason I went to law school, and perhaps the reason that you're considering law school. That because you want to make a difference, because you want to have an impact, because you want to change the direction, the course, and the moral trajectory of the nation, and because you are morally presumptuous enough to believe that you can. You stand in the same lineage and legacy of Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston and Paulie Marshall. You believe that you can. You're here at Harvard Law School because you believe you have a right to be here, because you have a right to make change, because you have a right to make a difference, and because you can bring about right. And I'll simply leave you with these modest words of encouragement for those who are inclined to doubt themselves and doubt their ability to move forward. The words are inscribed on a piece of faded manuscript, entombed in the Rare Book Library on the campus of Yale University, but they're written on the hearts of hundreds of thousands of members of the NAACP the world over. The words would be these: lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on, let us march on, let us march on, let us march on till victory is won. Seize your future.